وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين وآتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بعهدهم إذا عاهدوا والصابرين في البأساء والضراء وحين البأس أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم القصاص في القتلى الحر بالحر والعبد بالعبد والأنثى بالأنثى فمن عفي له من أخيه شيء فاتباع بالمعروف وأداء إليه بإحسان ذلك تخفيف من ربكم ورحمة فمن اعتدى بعد ذلك فله عذاب أليم ولكم في القصاص حياة يا أولي الألباب لعلكم تتقون كتب عليكم إذا حضر أحدكم الموت إن ترك خيرا الوصية للوالدين والأقربين بالمعروف حقا على المتقين فمن بدله بعدما سمعه فإنما إثمه على الذين يبدلونه إن الله سميع عليم صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Am I good? Now I'm in the screen. All right. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our weekly discussion. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our weekly discussion. So I wanted to also and for your mahrum, inshallah. So we're gonna go through a discussion. I like to introduce the topic in the beginning, and then we can delve into the discussion afterwards, just so we can know where we're going, right? So today, I've been going through this series about Palestine, talking about Palestine, and in the past we've talked about the history of the issue, talked about the origin of it, and we've talked about some of the issues that come along with it, be it nationalism, certain ideologies that come along with it, right? So we've gone through this process, and one of the things I wanted to touch on today was this idea of value, right? Where we value when we are doing certain things, and how we can use some of the information that we're learning from this book that we're going through to understand these things, right? So we're going to understand these this concept through this process, right? So what did we kind of go through last week, right? we had four different separations of how humans understand the world, right? Let's, but try. All right. So the four separations. Yes. Experience. Mysticism. Right. And reason. Right. These are the four areas of where we get our information, right? So we're talking about epistemology, and is that while we're doing this, what we're doing is trying to help our bits of understanding a concept and knowing what you believe in and having it based in something, right? And what was something that we did right before this, right? We did like, and there's the you guys remember this? You guys remember all this? All right. It informs so the worldview. So the idea is that in the book and in this logical philosophical discussions is that we're going through a process to try to take the same traditional process, right? There starts from a concept, this concept then branches down to something else, right? So we have this worldview. Yeah, exactly. So we have a certain worldview that informs how you see the world, right? And this is based off of, um, you know, you can also, you can kind of relate this to ideology based off of how you see it, right? We have capitalism, we have theism and atheism in terms of how you think the world is structured, and then we have the ideologies in terms of how the isms, right, that are developed based off of that. There you go. Thank you. What was the ideology? Behavior. Behavior. Right. And then we also, when we understand these overarching concepts, right, and how humans look at the world, we can structure our beliefs, right? Structure the world. We have this logical reference or frame information, right? Using these concepts that we've been developing, uh, let's tackle the idea of value. Where where do you all think value is derived from? Right. So let me get. Come on, guys. Let's. Hmm? No, no. Like, so where's it derived from? So if you're a capitalist, those are just. I'll start off with an example. If I'm a exactly. So it connects back to this worldview. It connects back to your ideology. So let's talk about our immediate feelings about ideas and ideologies. Understand value, and then we can look at it from this perspective, right? So I want to go through this process of understanding and going, tackling these. Come on, tell me what benefit, value off of the benefit you get from something. Okay, so if it's a medicine that's going to high value, experience. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Feelings? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's just value. So coming here has value because of the way it makes you feel. Experience. Anybody else? Okay, so you want to take it straight to these things. So it comes from all of those, but what did you say about the Quran? We're talking about that and reason or experience. Uh, connection. Okay. And, and so this is how we value, right? But let's also talk about how we value things in the real world, right? So we use currency to exchange value, right? We that's the mode of changing value. There's other ways of exchanging value in terms of time. Time's another way that we exchange. But how much weight or to give things? Right? We're getting there, so, right? It's a measure. You're going by doing this process, by giving something value, you're right. You're inherently or immediately go through a process in your mind, and you're immediately right. One of these interesting things I had a professor in law school doing was a very expensive watch, right? And he would speak to a student, get the student to talk about something valuable to them that didn't have monetary value, right? And then show them that you aren't willing to give up this watch or pen that you got from your grand for this very expensive watch, right? So the value there, the weight given is different, right? And this is very important for me as an attorney because what am I doing when I'm an attorney? I'm weighing evidence, right? When I'm petitioning the court, when I'm, filing a petition with a department within the UNESCO, what am I doing? I'm giving value to evidence and making an argument as to how this value should lead to this result, right? So there is a standard, right? When you are trying to explain what value is being presented, right? That's kind of the next step. So once I have the value determined, what results do I have? What conclusions can I make from weight and measure of things? Now I want to see how can we measure things on what basis, right? So we said value is based off of the benefits and the experience and the feeling, right? How do you measure it? How do you measure it? Because what, right? So one of the things here we have experience and reason, right? One of the things about experience, measure, reason. Okay, you're saying measuring standard. Can you give me an example in science? Mm-hmm.
Whatever that is, then measure pressure based on that.
That base value.
Yeah. Or similarly, 0 Celsius watt or so. Whatever water any solid any
Mm-hmm.
0 Celsius
Standard. Anybody else think of something in science that or think of a standard? Anybody else physics? No.
just hold the mic.
Oh. Okay, I can hold it. It's fine. But I don't know if I move my hands a lot. I'll try to keep it like this. Okay. So a measure is something. So one of the, I like physics, so I like to use it as a frame of reference to understand some of these concepts. So when we want to measure something, right? In quantum physics, right? There's this the uncertainty principle. When you have to come and measure an electron where it is in the wave function, you are measuring it, right? And you gotta take it to a single point. You're doing something. You're measuring it, right? There's what does that require? It requires some type of observation or interaction, right? So that's the first thing. To measure something, you have to have an experience with it. You have to interact with it. Time. Time is actually a very interesting. Even no matter what, time always goes moment by moment. So even though we understand this idea of relativity, also in physics, time, no matter um, how time is relative to another person, right? It's still a take moment by moment, right? So they always talk about, if you're here on Earth and you have a twin, and then you leave the Earth and go out, close to the speed of light and return, you haven't really aged, right? But your twin has, right? A lot of time has passed for them. But for you, it was just moment by moment by moment, right? For him, it was moment by moment by moment. It's a certain standard that each person experiences. But in relation to each other, it was relative, right? So there is something that kind of interferes with measurement is relativity. So how do you deal with relativity with measurement is a very difficult question. I will. I'll hold it like this now. No problem. Alhamdulillah. So again, I would really like some more suggestions about what is measurement. How do we give something? How do we measure things? So, how do you measure something? You go ahead. So measure something like just in general. So what I was trying to get is that when you measure something, you have to have a standard, and then with that standard, you can then go and make measurements, right? So let's all decide on how. Yeah, exactly. Or like the length of the arm or something. A centimeter. Some standards that would exist in like a Planck's constant. I guess a constant would be a standard, but anything. Yes. Mhm. There you go. So you have a standard, and then you can go back and measure. So if you ever want to measure something, you have to develop a standard, and then you measure, right? So this is where most things get kind of twisted. Where's the standard coming from, right? Where's the standard coming from when you're measuring and deciding what value things have? So yeah, no, this is a big problem. Yeah. Okay. But what is something that relativity is trying to say about reality? It's relative, right? But well, so what I would say is that relativity is in contrast in this situation to objectivity, right? So do you believe in anything that has objective value? You do. So then relativity is not a problem
Well, relativity.
when we're developing a standard.
I'm not saying they're necessarily contradictory, but rather
I would say that what you're trying to say is that there's certain things have objective value and certain things have relative value.
I mean, you could have both, right? So think of like a weighing scale.
Go ahead.
Put two weights on each side, one together. So if I say this is 1 kilogram, whatever, that's an arbitrary measure. So in that sense, it's not objectively a kilogram. But this is heavier than this. It's true in every scenario. It's subjectively true. But I measure it relatively to the other way. Looking at time, the past is before what is after. Seconds or minutes is relative. Happens before, happens after.
Okay.
Right? When goes space and comes back to speed of light.
Mm-hmm.
He left before he came back. That's objective.
So how can this information impact how we decide how what has value or how we give value to things?
Well, exactly.
So
have like a set group of rules for this is more important than this. What
yes.
you do is every time you have to make a decision, you evaluate what gives you. Yeah. And you say which yields the greatest justice to me. You can't always say something is good or bad. I mean, lying is bad, but if I'm lying to protect my brother from this tyrannical guy who wants to come and kill him, then lying is justified. It's still clear.
So wouldn't it be better to say that there is objectivity, but when it comes to specific circumstances, there is relativity. So when we talk about, we're going to talk about levels to things, right? So when we're talking about a certain level, when we talk about, let's say, laws, we have to be objective. But when we come down to maybe judgment, we have to be relative, right? Where there is a standard, there's an objective standard. But when this standard is put into reality or put into, I don't even think it's like put into reality. I think it's put into dunya. Let's keep it like that. You're putting it into the dunya. No, what do you continue? So, from what I understand, the presumption of continuity is that you presume that the current state is from a previous state. That there's that is that, and how do you think that impacts the uh, objectivity, relativity? Okay, um, so what I would say when it comes to law, what is law? So again, so why did I bring up law and value? What is that whole idea of law? Yeah, what's the whole idea? Okay. What I would say is that what comes here is that we have an X factor. We have a variable that we don't know what's going on. So if we're gonna look at it in terms of measurements, right? We have a variable and we don't know the value of it. When we come to laws, we have objective laws, but then when we come to judgment, we have a variable, which is the human, which complicates how these objective truths or laws are going to be applied, right? So even when we're talking about the value of things, and then it comes to relativity and objectivity, right? How we give things value. When we try to overcome this problem, what is it requiring? It's requiring that we understand that there is objectivity, there is relativity, right? But they occur on different planes, right? The objectivity leads to relativity because mm, we live in a dunya of plurality, and with this plurality, you have to things become relative. That's just what happens. You know, when you have uh, different things in time and space, we have different beings experiencing reality. You're going to have relativity because we're going to have parallax views, right? We're going to have different views of the same thing, right? I'm sure many people have heard of this, the analogy of the elephant, the five blind people going up to the elephant. You know, one goes to the trunk, one goes to the ear, one goes to the knee, and they are all seeing the elephant, but because of their uh, impairments, they are unable to see the full truth, right? Um, and so now we know that this is the structure in which value is made, right? So now we need to decide what our objective standard is.
Here's my question: do you ever have a true objective relative?
You have to base it off of something. That's the whole point. So that's why you have a standard.
What do you call it? Attempted objectivity?
No, you have to have the objective standard, but it won't. The idea is that you don't expect for this objective reality to ever be something you really experience physically.
It's almost like theoretically there's an objective.
So that's why I was saying they're on different planes.
When it's applied, it changes into
It gets destroyed. It gets twisted, like we said.
And the theoretic example of this is actually when you observe
Mm-hmm.
your observation of them actually
Yes.
affects
Exactly.
them as well.
Yes. Yes.
So you always have
So-
inherent objectivity or attempted objectivity.
So there's two ways to understand this. There's two ways that in physics they come to understand the this uncertainty in terms of what happens when we see something. But please.
Oh no, I was gonna see if this applies to what you guys think, but like the objective part
Mhm.
is Allah intended to have a wasi and wali on earth, right?
Mhm.
That was his intention, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But
what happened?
the objective, but
But what happened?
The dunya came into place, humans came into place, and that objective didn't work out because of a relativity.
Mhm.
The world didn't take it.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not saying that it's not.
No, that's.
The world didn't take it.
So what are you doing right now, though?
For everyone.
Can I? What I really.
People ended up with it.
But what I really like, what you're doing, though, what I really like what you're doing, you're. But what I really like what you're doing is you're extrapolating certain. You're extrapolating your thinking. You're extrapolating these concepts, and you're applying it to a certain thing or a certain thing that happened in history. Or that you're going through this process, and that's actually more important than this information. The process is more important than the information, right? Uh, it's good to understand how you do something than to memorize it. You know, it's understanding. And that's what you showed, that there's certain things that are objectively true, but then it doesn't necessarily have to happen or need to occur in that way, and it can be relative. And when we're talking about this, uh, the affection, there's two like really theories about what happens, right? Either one or the other happens, and then there's you're in superposition. You don't feel like you're in superposition to these things, but when you observe it, that's what happens, right? So they have the cat in the box. We have the Schrodinger's cat, right? Is the cat dead or alive? Uh, you don't know until you open the box, right? You can't know what's happened to the cat until you open the box. So what happens to the cat? Did something happen where it is alive or dead, or the other idea is that it's both, right? The because of the possibility of both being true, they both are true, and so they split into different universes, and you're in the universe where it died or where it lived, right? And so that's reality unfolding, right? It still unfolds and then it unfolds for all of us, and so we just got to take it for what it is, right? But let's go back to the point. The whole idea is we're talking about value, right? Let's go back to how we now need a standard, right? And I want us to, I'm going to erase all this, and before we end, I just want to talk about this standard and where are we supposed to get it from. There you go. Well, we have these four things. So whenever you're asking a question, you're going back to epistemology. How do I know something? What do I know? And so you're going back to our information. How do I know something? And so where am I going to get this value or standard? It's going to come from my experiences. It's going to come from reason. It's going to come from tradition. And it's going to come from mysticism. It's going to come from one of these, right? Let's break down each one real quickly and see why it has to come from only one of them. Mysticism. Can I share my mystical experience with you? So no objectivity there. It's relative. Experience. Can I use experience? Can I use experience?
We agree on the standard.
So that's so would pre-Galileo humans agree with our heliocentric model? No, they don't like our standard. So in terms of experience, humans have gone through this process.
Feet versus meters, right?
Feet versus meters. So there's a standard there. There's certain standards that we don't agree on. Certain measurements we don't agree on in experience. How about reason? Reason's a good one. Logic. This is a good one. Is it? And then we have the last one, tradition. So wait. So this is interesting. So what are you saying? So this is very interesting, and I'm going to end with this, right? So we have reason, and we have tradition. You're a Muslim, right? I'm a Muslim. How do we treat each other? Based off of which one?
Based on both. So my reason tells me you treat someone respect, but my religion tells me the same thing. But, good acts.
What standard? What standard is shared between us?
Oh, the traditional part.
So the standard that is shared between us, because that is what we can agree to, right? So what standard is agreed upon between us? So if we have a business dispute, what are we gonna go back to? Exactly, the Quran and Sunnah. We have a standard between each other that we have agreed on. We have consensus on that. So we're gonna go to it. When people have disputes, so the two reasons I brought up this verse and I had brother read it is because there's two different distinct things that are going on on this page. There's the idea of value of life and value of inheritance, very close to each other, right? Value of inheritance. How is it logical? Is it just given? Right? It's tradition. When it comes to life, what is the standard? Even in the Quran, what is the standard? Yeah, it's 1-to-1. It's based off of logic. It's 1-to-1. It's a 1-to-1. It's sin bis sin. Al-hur bil-hur. It's a 1-to-1, right? Because when it comes to the value of human life, it's not something that you're dealing with Muslim to Muslim. You might be dealing with someone who doesn't have a shared tradition. There's a different value system. So when you're working with someone who has a different value system than you, when it comes to tradition, what is the basis of with each other? What is the standard? It's always going to be reason and logic. Whenever you discuss anything with anybody who doesn't have the same worldview, doesn't have, what is the standard that you have to go back to is reason and logic. And that's why our weekly meetings are very important, because when we develop our ability to think and reason logically within our own tradition, we can then do that outside of our tradition. We can do it with others, right? And alhamdulillah for Islam, and alhamdulillah for the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam, and alhamdulillah for Ahlul Bayt, because they have given us the most perfect standard, alhamdulillah, and it's a ni'mah, right? Um, and the beautiful thing about it is that it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm going to end by saying that the value of life is sacred, right? Throughout all religions, throughout all civilizations, the value of life has always been sacred and very important. And whenever on the news and seeing numbers, just numbers, when it comes to people dying, right? It's just a number, right? How many women and children have died in Palestine recently? Tens of thousands. We were just throwing out numbers. At the end of the day, it's just numbers, right? But we need to realize that human value is sacred, and when it comes to measuring a human life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? It's as if you're saving the whole world, right? The value of one human life is as if you're saving the whole entire world. So there is nothing comparable to a single human life. You can't give a monetary value to a human life. You can't give experiential value to a human life, right? It is sacred, and let's end with please Allah salawat and Surah Al-Fatiha for all the people in Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, and all the Muslimin in the world. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Thank you, Brother Muhammad. Inshallah, if people are listening, you can always ask questions on the chat, and we have people as well here who can ask questions. Inshallah, next we have Brother Ali, who will give us a historical overview of the another branch of the Ismailis. Last week it was the Nizari Ismailis. This week it is the Musta'lis or the Tayyibis, inshallah. To welcome him, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Can we please start with the Surah Fatiha for those around the world who are in need of our Fatihas? Can I move this around? No, I'm not gonna. No, I don't want to erase it. It's empty. It's empty. Okay, so the topic of discussion over the last several weeks that we've been having has been that of the various Shi'i adjacent groups that we've, excuse me, that we can encounter in the Muslim world. And the idea is that it's important to know our neighbors, right? We want to know who they are and what they believe in and what they think, because many of us, myself included, myself foremost, didn't have too much knowledge of who they were. Who were these various groups, these groups that we've discussed, the Alawis, the Bektashis, the Alawis, that we've spoken about for the last few weeks. So last week we spoke about the Ismailis with a particular focus on the Nizari branch of the Ismailis. And inshallah tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the Musta'lis or Tayyibi Ismailis, the second or smaller branch of the Ismailis. So the Ismailis are the second largest Shi'i denomination after the Twelvers. They kind of pale in comparison in terms of numbers. It's estimated that there's about 12 to 15 million Ismailis in general in the world, so in totality. And they're split amongst as we said, the Nizaris and the Tayyibis. So last week we discussed the origins of Ismailism itself. So let's have a bit of a recap. Ismailism started among those who proclaimed Ismail ibn Ja'far al-Mubarak, who was the eldest son of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, alayhi salam, to be his rightful successor. So if we take a look at it, we start with Imam Ali alayhi salam. We go down to the point of, let's say, Imam al-Sadiq, right? Obviously with the previous Imams in this sort of order. We take Imam al-Qadim as alayhi salam as the Imam after Imam al-Sadiq. But the Ismailis take his son Ismail. Okay. Problems arose, however, whenever Ismail died during the life of Imam al-Sadiq. Okay. So his death split the Mubarakiyah, as the Ismailis were known at the time. Some believe that Ismail went into occultation, that he went into ghaiba, and that the appointment of Imam Musa al-Qadim was an act of taqiyya done by Imam al-Sadiq in order to distract the Abbasids from the true Imam, Ismail. So these people became known as the Seveners, who have largely faded into history, save the Karmatians, who were a group who were famous for sacking Mecca, stealing the Black Stone, proclaiming an Iranian peasant to be the Mahdi, as well as reshifting the Qibla from the Kaaba to a Zoroastrian fire temple. They were a kind of short-lived group.
Obviously, they're wrong.
Obviously, yes. And the person who they claimed to be the Mahdi was later betrayed by his own followers and they disbanded. They were present in eastern Arabia, so that area between what is now Basra and Oman, particularly focused in the area of Bahrain, as we have today. Sorry? I'm sorry, what was it?
So that it ended with him.
Yes, it ended with him, yeah. Other Ismailis accepted Muhammad bin Ismail al-Maktoum as Ismail's successor. So, Ismail had a son named Muhammad. Now, Muhammad was eventually pushed out of Medina by the majority of the Shia of his time, who accepted Imam al-Qadim, who would eventually become, or who are what we are today, the 12th or Ithna Ashariya. Muhammad fled to Iran and he later fled to Syria, where he and his descendants established the imamate in the city of Salamiya. Right, so they disguised themselves as Hashemi traders, merchants, and they lived there for the course of about 200 years. And so for a few centuries, the Ismaili imams of Syria served as secret imams here. They sent trusted missionaries or da'is to places like Iran, Yemen, and India, to name a few. The Ismailis in this time had underground influence across the Muslim world, with many holding that the 9th century influential secret society of philosophers, the Ikhwan as-Safa, were Ismailis themselves, the Brethren of Purity. They were very influential in Basra, especially in Iraq. And it's been held by most scholars today that they were in fact Ismailis. In terms of philosophy, the kind of Neoplatonic thoughts that the Ismailis hold were kind of subtly introduced into, I suppose, mainstream Muslim scholarship, somewhat to an extent. By these secret society, yes. They have their own encyclopedia that they wrote, so to speak, that you can read on the internet, yes.
I'm pretty sure you said it, but what modern country are they representing?
The Ismailis in general? So the Ismaili movement started in Medina. So they started in Medina, yeah, and then the Ismaili Imams, turn it off. The Ismaili Imams later moved eventually to Syria.
Okay.
And then it's from Syria where they're going to eventually move to North Africa. So we're going to start. So the underground nature of the Ismailis changed in the 10th century when Abdullah al-Mahdi Billah proclaimed himself to be the Caliph Imam of the new Fatimid Caliphate in North Africa. So Abdullah was a da'i of the Ismaili line. Within that, even his own lineage as being an imam was actually challenged by some Ismailis at the time. I believe by the Karmatians. So it was he was of dubious origins in terms of his ancestry and connection to the imams. Yeah, yeah. He starts. That's an interesting question. He started in Syria with an uprising against the Abbasids, which failed, and he fled to what is now modern day Morocco. Okay, so at the time, Morocco and Iran were the wild west and wild east of the Muslim world. And we'll talk about that next week, inshallah, if we have the time. A lot of people who opposed the Khilafah fled to those regions and established themselves there in order to kind of hide. His main supporter, I believe his name was Abu Abdullah, a Shi'i. He traveled to North Africa and he was able to gain the support of various Berber tribes against a group known as the Aghlabids. The Banu Aghlab, were a Arab sort of dynasty that ruled from what is now Tunisia, in Libya and Algeria. They controlled Sicily. They controlled North Africa. We're talking the 10th century here, AD. Um, it was a Shi'i and his Berber tribes who were able to defeat them and take power from them. They ruled on behalf of the Abbasids.
They were Sunnis?
These Aghlabids were Sunnis, yes. Yes, the Aghlabids, yeah. The Berbers at the time were largely either Khawarij or they were often following some sort of Shi'i group. Zaydis, typically in Morocco. Yeah. Most of them were not, or at least a good deal of them were not. Yeah, they lived in these rural kind of environments, in their own traditional societies. And back then, of course, the Berber-Arab divide was much greater than what we have today because they were newly introduced. Right, the Arabs were to the region. Yeah, inshallah, that would be. Yeah, inshallah, the Zaydi origins of Morocco, because Morocco started as a Zaydi Shi'i state. Yeah. So the Fatimids took over that North African area, Ifriqiya, in Africa, and they ended up founding the new city of Cairo as their capital. Cairo was founded by the Fatimids, the capital of Egypt today. And they would rule over an area that stretched from modern day Morocco to the Hijaz, as well as to Syria. So all those lands between, as well as Sicily, were within, which is a island off the coast of Italy, were within their control. And so here it was in Cairo that they established centers of Ismaili learning, such as Al Azhar, which is the most prestigious institution of Sunni learning and scholarship today. It was founded by the Ismailis as an Ismaili center of learning. They sent missionaries or da'is across the Muslim world to spread their teachings, and they had quite a bit of influence across the Islamic world. Nasir Khosrow of Balkh is one of the most famous Persian poets in history. He was an Ismaili philosopher and theologian, in fact. From Cairo, the Fatimids also challenged the authority of the Abbasids in Baghdad. So you had two rival caliphates, one in Iraq and one in Cairo, with the Abbasids being a Sunni caliphate and the Fatimids being an Ismaili Shi'i caliphate. And the Fatimid claim was strengthened by the fact that they actually held control and patronage over Mecca and Medina. So it was them who controlled the pilgrimage in those cities, as well as Jerusalem, which were, of course, important pilgrimage sites back then. I believe it was Sheikh al-Mufid, if I'm not mistaken, who was requested by the Abbasids. Sheikh Razi, okay. Sheikh Razi, who was requested by the Abbasid Caliph to actually denounce the Fatimids, but he refused to do so in terms of denouncing their authority. So, as is tradition in any organization, differences of opinions led to a splitting of the Ismailis in the late 11th century. So, some believe that a man named Nizar, who was their caliph, who was removed from the Fatimid throne by Armenian vizier, to be the rightful imam, whereas others accepted al-Musta'li, his younger brother, as the rightful imam. So, you have no, this is during it. So, this is in the waning years, or the latter years, let's say. You've got yeah, we are now in like the kind of the 11th, 10th century. So you've got the Syrian period, where it's about 200 years or so. And then you've got the Fatimids in Cairo. And it's in this point in which it splits, let's say, to the Nizar and then the Musta'lis. Right? So the Nizaris are the ones that we spoke about last week. Right? these are the ones who currently follow the rulership or the guidance of the Aga Khan, who we might be in Portugal. Yes, they have a living apparent imam. I believe he's the 49th, if I'm not mistaken. Musta'lis are different. I'll tell you why. Um, Al-Musta'li actually won out in the temporal contest. So it's the Musta'lis who held on to power among the Fatimids. The Nizaris kind of went into exile. They challenged Musta'li, but their survivors ended up in Syria and Iran and later in India, Tajikistan, Pakistan, and East Africa, which is where they are today. And they are the majority of the Ismailis, about 12 million or so, compared to the Musta'lis today, 1.5 million perhaps. Musta'lis are mostly in India, but there are some in Saudi Arabia and Yemen as well. Pakistan, most of the Pakistani, there are in Pakistan, but most of the Pakistani ones would be Nizaris. The Gujarati Musta'lis are very prominent in India. So further divisions split the Musta'lis later on in the waning era of the Fatimids between the now extinct Hafidis and the Tayyibis. So again, it's kind of our sunnah to split into different sects, you know. So they would later split into the Hafidis, who would retain the throne, and the Tayyibis, who we have today. So these are extinct. Yeah, killed out. Yeah, exactly. The Musta'lis continued to hold power as the Fatimid Caliphate, but not for long. In the late 12th century, a young Kurdish vizier from Syria, originally from Tikrit, northern Iraq, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, on the orders of the Turkish kind of ruler of the region, Nur ad-Din Zangi, he would seize power from the Fatimids in a coup, bringing their rule to an end. So Salah ad-Din was a vizier. He was the prime minister of the Fatimid Caliphate, although he was a Sunni Kurd from outside.
Wait, he was in the government
He was the prime minister, essentially.
of the Fatimid Caliphate.
Yeah. No, he was open Sunni. Yeah. The Imam.
No, but the Fatimids, they also had.
Yes, the Fatimids were quite religiously tolerant. Yes. Yeah, Maimonides went to North Africa. Yes.
Yeah, but they're open to different ideas. But I think to put a prime minister
there was a lot of division among the Shia Ismailis at the time, and so the idea was to bring someone who's not. It didn't work out for them in the end, though. So Salah ad-Din, when he did that, he actually established his sultanate and he pledged his allegiance to the Abbasids of Baghdad. So now Salah ad-Din's his empire was actually part of the Abbasid Caliphate, or recognized them. He was not a Turk, so he was a Kurd. He was an ethnic Kurd. Yes. So at the time in the Middle East, much of the Middle East was ruled by these Turkish warlords like Nur ad-Din, right? And his family came under the patronage of him. He was sent to Egypt to kind of get into the government there by Nur ad-Din.
So it was a plot. Was it a plot?
Yeah. Nur ad-Din was a Turk, yes. Yeah. Yeah, he did a coup d'etat.
But what I'm saying is, was it all plotted from the beginning, or just happened that he did the coup at the end?
That's a good question.
Was he like a sleeper agent?
Yeah,
Was he a
that's what I'm
sleeper
saying,
agent?
it's a film or something,
Yeah,
you know?
it's perhaps, yeah, maybe. But it certainly worked because it brought Egypt and the Fatimids under the bay'at, the allegiance of the Abbasids, very quickly.
But I guess you got to think about like the whole situation at that time. The Crusades were happening at that time, so the Fatimids lost.
The Fatimids did fought off the Crusaders.
No,
Yeah.
but they lost Jerusalem.
Yes.
And so
They were.
maybe
Yeah.
and you are saying this is at the waning years of the Fatimids.
Even this split is a few decades before Salah ad-Din comes in.
Wow. So
It's all crashing.
It's all going down already.
It's all
Salah ad-Din used probably like
he picked up the pieces essentially. Yeah. They were not at their height. Yeah, certainly. He burned Ismaili books, killed Ismailis. Yes, very much. Threw Ismaili books at the bottom of the Nile, and rededicated Al Azhar as this center of Sunni scholarship that we have today. So it was him who rededicated to a primarily Shafi'i, being a Kurd. What was it? Sorry. No, this was Salahuddin who did all this.
He did it
Within his reign, as soon as he became, at that same period in which he seized power, became sultan. He destroyed the Fatimid Caliphate, established the Ayyubid sultanate, I suppose you could say, gave bay'at to the Abbasids during his lifetime, and converted these Ismaili centers of knowledge into Sunni ones. It's important to recognize that most Egyptians were Sunnis, though. They were not Ismailis. The Ismailis were a group in the ruling class. They were a minority. It wasn't as if the majority of Egypt was Ismaili and they became Sunnis. That would be a kind of misconception. So the Tayyibis emerged during the waning years of the Fatimids, like we said. They believed in the imamate of At-Tayyib Abu al-Qasim, who was a man who went into the occultation in the 12th century, so just a few decades before the end of it all. Okay, the Imam At-Tayyib, as they know him, who was the 21st Imam for them, he went into occultation. It's believed that not just that he is in occultation, but that he has had descendants in occultation, so that he has maintained his sort of secretive line of descent to this day, if that makes sense. But we don't know who the current Imam. The Da Vinci Code, yes. It's a hidden bloodline known by the Da'i al-Mutlaq.
So it is known by someone.
Yes. So the Da'i al-Mutlaq is the chief missionary, the chief Da'i. This was a position that was established by the Queen of Yemen at the time. The Queen of Yemen, who was the first reigning Muslim queen in the Muslim world. She was considered to be the Hujjatul Islam, actually, of the Tayyibi Ismailis. She was an Ismaili, yes. She was entrusted by the Tayyibis to establish the position of the Da'i al-Mutlaq to represent the Imam in his occultation. And so that is who leads the Tayyibi Ismailis today, as opposed to the Nizaris who have the Aga Khan, who have their apparent Imam. They don't follow, they have a chief missionary. It depends on the group of there's more splitting. Yes, there's more splitting, yeah. They established themselves in Yemen, which remained the base of their activities for several centuries. And from Yemen, the Da'i al-Mutlaq led the Tayyibi community, sending missionaries to India, where they found significant success. Only a few centuries later, the Tayyibis of Gujarat in India and Western India had surpassed those in Yemen. These new Indian Tayyibis came to be known as Bohras. Bohra being a Gujarati word for merchant or trader, which is what they self-identify as. Yemeni missionaries, religious missionaries, going to India, spreading the word, and it becoming very popular, especially in that Western Indian region. And after a few hundred years, they actually take over the Yemenis in terms of numbers. They surpass them, I should say. So today, the Tayyibis are split among three. You've got the Dawoodi Bohras. Well, actually, let me put it this way. You've got the Bohras, and then you've got the Suleimanis. And the Bohras are further split into the Dawoodis and the Alavis. So the Dawoodi Bohras and the Alavi Bohras, again, these splits emerge within the 15th and 16th centuries Gregorian. Okay, the Dawoodi Bohras are largely found in India today. The Suleimanis are largely found in the historical region of Yemen, which now consists of Saudi Arabia, so the area of Najran in Saudi Arabia. So that sort of Saudi-Yemeni border region, as well as parts of southwestern Saudi Arabia near the Yemeni border. What they're split over really is their succession in leadership. Who is the Da'i al-Mutlaq? Who is the chief missionary? That's the key. That's the key distinction between them. Not really so much theology or practice, but more so leadership. The Dawoodi Bohras are probably the ones that we're most familiar with. They're known for their unique and colorful clothing, their language of Lisan al-Da'wat, which is a Bohra-specific language. It's a mix of Gujarati, Arabic, Urdu, and Persian that they speak. They're commonly found in the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala on pilgrimage. If you ever go to Iraq, you'll see them. The Sulaimanis of Yemen have similar beliefs, but they differ in culture, as they are Arabs, of course, and in leadership. These are the sort of Indian branch. Yeah, it's the Yemenis. So, as discussed last week, the Ismailis place a great emphasis on the batin or esoteric nature of the religion. Ismailis are inspired by Neoplatonic thought in their theology. They believe that God, or the One, emanates everything, okay, including the intellect and the universal soul, which is used to create the temporal world. However, the 11th century Ismaili missionary Hamid ad-Din al-Kirmani differed from the Neoplatonic model. He believed in 10 different intellects that descend from the One. So I'll try to kind of give you that. So you've got the One, or God. His writings in particular have particularly influenced Tayyibi theology as opposed to just Nizari. This is kind of the distinction between the Nizaris and the Tayyibis. The Tayyibis have a more complex Neoplatonic. There are additions to it, I would say. So drama arises as the third of these intellects. So you have 10 intellects. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay. Drama arises as the third of these intellects covets the rank of the second intellect. Okay. As a result, the third intellect is punished by being cast down to the 10th and lowest rank. It is this intellect that acts as the creator or demiurge of our universe, right? Which is therefore perceived as the inferior created world. Since it was the cast down one, our world in this sort of Platonic way of thinking is not perfect. It's not sufficient. It's inferior to that which is ethereal, I guess you could say. I think, Muhammad, if I'm phrasing that right. So some beings in this created world, this is our world, created world, are inclined towards a higher order. Some are inclined towards evil, like shaitan. History is divided into cycles, each culminating in the arrival of the Qa'im, who comes at the end of the cycle with the prophets in order to have some sort of minor resurrection, as is known. The Qa'im brings about the next cycle, ascending to the place of the 10th intellect. So among each cycle, the Qa'im comes in at the first one, it becomes the 10th, the 10th gets pushed up to the 9. As each cycle goes on, the Qa'im will ascend once, that previously banished 10th will go up to the next one, up to the next one, up to the next one, until it reaches back to its original place at the final great resurrection, or the end of times, in which the Qa'im has reunited that 10th or that third intellect up to where it originally back was. Yes, the cycles of the world and history. This, I mean, Hamid al-Din al-Kirmani, this was before they really went to India. So this was kind of before that. This was 1000s. So this was kind of within that time period. But yeah, they're Nizaris particularly. I've heard of a lot of Hindu influence on them. I've heard that they even, if I'm not mistaken, and I've heard different things, but that Shiva and Krishna are even incorporated, or have been incorporated by certain Nizari missionaries to India. Some have even said that Imam Ali was alayhi salam was an avatar of Shiva or Krishna. So again, the end of each cycle sees the further ascension of the Qa'im until the reuniting of that intellect. So in practice, though, the Tayyibis are similar to the rest of the Muslim world. Okay, in contrast to the Nizaris, they pray and they fast, they perform the Hajj, they attend masjids, and so forth. It is important to recognize that the Tayyibis have preserved much of the Sharia, not ruling it out as now being an unnecessary exoteric practice as the Nizaris have. And their fiqh really comes from a guy, Al-Nu'man Abu Hanifa. Not that one. A very similarly renamed another Abu Hanifa Al-Nu'man, not the 9th century Persian jurist from Iraq, but an 11th century jurist from North Africa who worked very closely with the imams because they were a parent at this time. This was before the split. In writing these books of fiqh, right? So he compiled the fiqh from the imams because he could go there and speak with him, and as well as hadith and so on. So Da'a'im al-Islam, Da'a'im al-Islam, that's their um, that's their book of the Ismailis. Yeah, yeah, they're different. Yeah, 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 different method. Yeah, it's not. They cursed people who did ijtihad in their time because they have the imam there. So he would go and consult with the imam. The imam would tell him what's going on or what it should be. In their imams in the Fatimi times. This is in the height of the caliph. The caliph, he would go to the caliph. He would compile it into his books. I believe there are 4 books that he's most known for, if I'm not mistaken. So the Tayyibis, as I said, they can be found on pilgrimage today in the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala because remember they accept these early imams of ours all the way up until Imam Sadiq. So you won't find them in Samara or Baghdad, but you'll find them in Najaf and Karbala. But they do respect our later imams. They see them as kind of like secondary imams, from what I've heard, as in the cousins of their true imams, and those imams who were appointed as a distraction from the true imam who was in hiding. So they do have respect for them, from what I've seen. It's the Dawoodi Bohras who have financially contributed towards the upkeep and refurbishment of the shrines in Iraq. So they've provided many of the shrines, the actual structures. To this day, yes, they contribute quite significantly in terms of the upkeep of those. Yeah. They can also be found in Egypt, which is the spiritual capital, or their spiritual capital as the descendants of the Fatimids. Last summer when I was in Cairo, I saw them at the Imam al-Hussein Mosque. I think a few years ago. You can see them, they're kind of wearing their kind of special clothing.
I didn't know who to look for.
Yeah, you can kind of notice them. Yeah, the Sayyid Zainab Masjid as well, that was built by them. They kind of, it's mostly the women who wear more colorful clothing. It's the men who were typically all white with some sort of hat, like a cap, kind of a golden colored cap that they wear. Yeah, they so because of that, the Fatimids really tried to place that significance of the Imams and the Ahlul Bayt within their city. So unlike the Twelvers, the Ismailis are divided into various branches of leadership and belief. In conclusion, the key distinction between the Nizaris and Tayyibis are as follows. While the Nizaris believe in an apparent, open, living Imam in the form of the Aga Khan, what was it? Oh, sorry. In Portugal, yes, the billionaire sort of, play. Well, cameras on him as well. No, it's. I mean, you can see the pictures of him in his bathing suit on his yacht or whatnot. And yeah, he has a divine plan. What was it? In fact, with the Nizaris, for the Pakistanis, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, he was born into an Ismaili family. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a Nizari family, but he later became a Twelver in his lifetime. That's what he died upon. The Tayyibis believe, so while they believe in an apparent open Imam, the Tayyibis do not. They don't have access to him except for the Da'i Mutlaq. So that's the big thing.
Have access to the Imam, or do they not have access? And Da'i just kind of represents it.
I've heard different things.
Like our ulama,
I've heard that he has knowledge of who the current Imam is. But then again, it's a little bit obscure, especially dealing with their beliefs because they're such a small group, especially the Sulaimanis and such. They don't really put their beliefs out to people, if that makes sense. And that's the problem with many Shi'i groups other than the Twelvers, is they don't.
They're not evangelical.
They're not evangelical. No, they're not. Although they do because they have the Da'i system. So you would think that they would, but it seems like they've been kind of slacking in modern times. But in conclusion, they are represented by the chief missionary Da'i Mutlaq. The identity, of course, is cause for debate. Furthermore, while the Nizaris have ruled the outward practices of the Sharia, like praying and fasting, as unnecessary in our time, the Tayyibis preserve these practices. In conclusion, it's my hope that we can engage in dialogue with the Tayyibis and discuss our many commonalities, most notably our love for the family of the Holy Prophet. They actually have a Dawoodi Bohra Center in Ybor City. So it's been my goal, hopefully, inshallah, one day to go with you all and to visit them. Yeah, the Bohras do prayers and fasting. The Nizaris don't. They don't have. The Nizaris do a dua 3 times a day in their Jamaat Khana, which is Jamaat Khana is it's like their masjid. You can actually hear their dua on YouTube. Quran, salawat, general dua. It's on. I've listened to it on YouTube before. You can, if you look up Nizari dua, or you can, they do 3 times a day. Yeah.
We were big in Muharram. I mean, this happens to Muharram every single day of the year. So they commemorate Imam Hussein every single day.
Yeah.
It's part of their ritual.
Kind of like how the Alevis, the Alevis do it within their gems. The Turkey, they have that commemoration is their 10th stage. Yes, one of those things. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they're buried there. Yes. That's a good question. I think, from what I know, I think that there are mausoleums. So not. Yeah, a little bit smaller, but I don't know. I'd have to look back into that. It's a good question. That's a good question. I don't know. I would imagine if they're there, if they go to, those are their imams. Yeah. There were 21 up until this point. Yeah. They're buried in Syria too. You could in Iran. The Nizaris have their shrines in Iran. The Fatimids. That's a good question. Yeah, that is a good question. There are Fatimid cemeteries in Egypt that are dated to the Fatimid era. In fact, one of the Aga Khans of the Nizaris in the 20th century, when I was in Egypt last summer, I was on a boat ride in Aswan, which is a city in the very far south near Sudan, and the captain of the boat pointed up to me and said in Arabic, said, "That's where the Shia Imam used to live." I said, "What?" I said, "What Shia Imam used to live there?" He said, the Imam of the Shia. I said, "Well, maybe of the Imam of the Ismailis." But, the Aga Khan, one of them, he had a house. And I believe he's buried up there, actually, on a hill in Aswan. So, yeah, you can certainly see them. People do visit that as an attraction. Who did? No. In which period? In the Fatimids, they were Arab. Arab in Egypt, yes. Yeah. But it was here in which they sent their missionaries to Iran. In Syria, there's still that city that they lived in is still Ismaili today. Salamiya. There's they are Nizaris. There are Nizaris who still live there. I don't know if I would say all of it is, but I've seen the Aga Khan has visited that city. Excuse me. Yeah. No, he is a technically, I suppose you could say he's a European man. Yeah, his mother was European, I believe. His father is a mix of European and Persian. So I think he identifies as a Persian in many ways. In fact, he skied for Iran in the 1964 Olympics. He lost. You can go to the Olympics website and I'm not alleging anything. I just went to the website. Yeah. This was anyway. Well, again, it's a little bit hard to. Anyway, we'll talk about it another time. Dawoodi's, just leadership, just leadership. No, these are different. These are different. There's so many Alevis, Shias. Oh, yeah, they split in India. They're just different leadership. This is all these are Indians. The Bohras are Indians, and they've got the Dawoodis who are the majority today. Um, there's Alevi Bohras as well. Indian Alevis. Ali, yeah.
So they call him Alavi.
I mean, so I'm thinking, like, no wonder that Shiites are like so like it's so conflated with everything else out there.
Yeah, I think
The traditional 12
This that we're all mixed in together.
Yeah, like, you get conflated with all of
Anybody
these.
who's not
They don't understand.
thinks that we believe all of
We
them.
don't pray.
No, all of them. We're a mix of all of them.
this is all pretty obscure, though. To be fair, for the general person, when you think of it.
One person
Historically,
It's like what happened with you in Egypt, right?
Yeah, right.
So what happened
Yeah,
with you in Egypt?
yeah, he thought that. Yeah, that was his. Yes, yeah.
That's what made me think that.
You're right. Yes, you're right. And it's true that in history, like you said, in history, these groups were more prominent. Today, we live in a 12er dominated Shi'i world. But in the 11th century, these were the ones who were big in terms of power.
Like, if I were to look back at Sunni texts from that time when they're saying Shi'i and Authentic, are they referring to Ismaili?
That's a good question because both because
Well, I guess the difference is no, the main.
even Salah ad-Din, it's said that most of his historical problems with the Shia were with the Ismailis in terms of actual.
But not with the 12ers?
Not as much because the 12ers were not in positions of power to that level. The 12ers existed in his contact in Lebanon, in which he used them as soldiers in the Crusades. And the 12ers also ruled over the city of Medina, in which he actually helped them to kind of get into that position. That's another discussion. The 12er descendants of Imam al-Hussein actually ruled over Medina for a few hundred years. And Zaydi descendants of Imam al-Hassan ruled over Mecca. So Mecca and Medina were controlled by Shi'i dynasties for several hundred years. We don't know that, though, because we just kind of put them under it's the Fatimids. But in reality, it was all subcontract work. It's like going to go get your house done today, right? You're not actually going to have the owner do it. It's all this stuff was, rulership.
Under the Fatimi authority, but the families who ruled happened to be.
And then later the Ayyubids, yeah.
Even under the Ayyubids.
And then later the Mamluks and the Ottomans, but they eventually by the period of the Mamluks and the Ottomans, they became Shafi'i. It's said. That's who. Yes, yeah, they are descended from the Zaydi rulers of Mecca.
Hussein ibn Ali, the Sharif of Mecca.
Yes. He's and Abdullah of Jordan.
And what's his name of Iraq? The king of Iraq.
Faisal, yes, Faisal. These are all descended from Hussein bin Ali, the Sharif who led the Arab revolt against the Ottomans. They were the descendants of the Shi'i Zaydi rulers of Mecca, who were Shia for maybe 400 years or so, 500 years, until they became Shafi'i.
But tell me about us in Medina.
Obviously, Medina has a sizable Shi'i population to this day. There are Shi'i neighborhoods. You would, of course, know, right?
He's not from Medina.
No, but your family lived in Medina.
Oh,
Yeah. So they ruled hundreds of years ago, maybe 500 or so years ago.
The minority of what they call
Nakhwali, the Nawakhila.
darker skin. And there's more other ones. I'm not sure if they're actually Hashemites or not. Some of them are actually merchants.
Probably from other outside, because the Hijaz is such a melting pot.
Date trees, because they used to work with the date trees. They're actually the most beautiful, very nice people. Like a darker skin person.
we have a Medina.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Shaka. Yeah. Yeah.
They're very nice people. They have very similar features, and then very similar mannerisms and dialects. So chances are, if you see a darker skinned person in Medina, he's more like Nakhwali.
It's a good
I
question.
heard that they were that they traced their back to some of the servants of the imams, but I don't know that for sure. It's just a rumor.
It's good when you go to Medina to get a Shi'i taxi driver. When I was there last year, he took you to like Imam Ali's well, and the house of say the father. Sort of in the southern part of the city, this obscure kind of you get the real experience. Yeah, and I saw the Shi'i masjid when I was there, but it was closed unfortunately. Yeah, kind of hidden behind those palm trees, date palms. Yeah, well, thank you for that was open inshallah. Hopefully we learn. I get this too.
There's like one or two people. If anyone has any miscellaneous questions, or I think there's one or two people in the chat. Or no, it's actually on YouTube. You're live streamed on YouTube. Unfortunately, we're using a potato because I couldn't get the quality up more than 144p, so we're gonna have to improve that next week. But at least we're out live, and we'll edit it a little bit. And
We had at Old IC when I was like in my 20s. We had a group with Dr. Rashid. We founded it. It's called the Muslim Youth Brotherhood. It was me,